Hey everybody, we are Robert, Martin, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Welcome back to Snakes and Otters, everyone. This is going to be episode 39, Our Heroes. And to get you started, I'll give you a subtle hint as to who our hero is today. Get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
Oh yeah.
Hey, I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
All right, so obviously we're going to be talking about Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
The great, the one and the only
Your
Chuck.
paws off me, you damn dirty ape.
It's probably the most famous line the man uttered.
Yeah.
He was in over 120 movies, episodes of TV shows. He directed a few things. He did screenplay for one. The man acted his entire adult life. And yet he's remembered for that one line.
For many, but it was a great movie.
It was a great movie.
It was an amazing risk, actually.
Yeah.
It only got made because he signed on to the concept, because he was a big enough star that could make it happen.
Yeah, when we think about it today, this would be done all with CGI, but that was all makeup and prosthetics and what have you. And that was a very expensive and very ambitious thing.
It couldn't have been made before. It was only the makeup that made it happen. They sold a new idea to make it realistic.
I mean, he signed off on a hugely expensive screen test to test the makeup with the director and all that stuff, and
which again shows not just his pull as an actor, but his influence behind the scenes.
Right.
So before we get into, because that's halfway through the man's career.
Oh yeah.
Planet of the Apes is a rabbit hole.
That's a huge rabbit hole for us.
We're going to eventually do a Planet of the Apes episode. We've got to sooner or later. Oh, the whole franchise, because that deserves some time.
So Charlton Heston, he is obviously, even though I am captaining this episode, this is a hero for all of us.
Yes,
this is not one for just one of us. Charlton Heston is somebody whose work we have admired for years. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we have a lot of sympathy for a lot of the stands he has taken throughout his life, whether it be from marching with Dr. King to his work later on. He has always been a man of principle, and that is something that we truly admire. It's not just the work. So, Charlton Heston, Chuck, as he liked to be called, he was born in 1923, so he's a geezer. His 100th birthday is just 3 years from now. Mm-hmm. That's an astounding thing when I think about it. Makes me feel kind of old.
Sure.
So, but he lived until 2008, so he had a long life.
And a long career, too.
And a long career. He had a career longer than, most actors could even dream of. One of the most famous roles he had was 10 Commandments. He did 25 things before he did 10 Commandments.
Yeah, we were counting them all up in the show prep, and we realized, wow, he did all that then?
But that was only his 6th year of making movies.
Yeah.
And, he still had another 100 things after that he did. So he was very prolific. He was constantly working. But he was a well-educated man. He wasn't just some guy with a pretty face. Because he's not what today we would consider a classical, pretty face. He's a rugged guy. Mm-hmm. He's a man's man.
Yeah, he said his nose is what got him into it. He has a little bit of a craggy nose, and he said that he was on the set one day and waved at Cecil B. DeMille. This is before he ever did The Greatest Show on Earth, which was one of his first big breakouts. And he noticed him because of the nose. And next thing you know, he's cast. And from there, he does not only that one, but then goes on to do the 10 Commandments for DeMille just a few years later. All because of a wave he did one day.
Right. So he studied at Northwestern University. He's a Big Ten man. Mm-hmm. And grew up in Michigan, which, big for me. Mm-hmm. And he served in the Army, in the U.S. Army Air Forces. He's a staff sergeant, so he was not just some, guy toting a gun. He was in the 77th Bombardment Squadron. Now, that pretty much is the extent of what I know about what he did in the war. But he served.
Yeah, he was in the Pacific. He made the comment years later that he would have been part of the invasion force of Japan if that had to happen.
Right.
I believe he was a crewman on bombers.
On bombers, okay.
Yeah, not a pilot, but but part of the gun crew, I guess, on a bomber. Which again, I think that was the idea was they were gathering those forces all throughout the Pacific, including Alaska. I believe he served in Alaska.
Yes,
and the idea was, that was going to be part of the bombardment if there was going to be an actual invasion of Japan.
Right. So after that, after he got out of the war, he and his wife Lydia, they went to New York. They did a lot of theater work. But ultimately, he ended up in Hollywood. And that's where he obviously made his name. He also did a lot of television, like one-off episodes. It's not like he did a continuing series. But he also did a lot of television movies, which, today we would think that's a step down for an actor. But back then, it was all the same. And for him, it really was.
Yeah, for him, acting was the craft.
Yes.
It didn't really matter about the channel. He would, if it's a good role, he did television, he did TV movies, he did major motion pictures, he did theater. It's just whatever spoke to him. And this was not just when he was struggling or when he was a success and a household name. It's whenever he could.
And theater was always a great love. I think he dabbled in that here and there throughout his career as well.
In the 70s and 80s, he played Thomas More on the London West End stage for several years. This is one of the things that prompted him to play More in the TNT TV version of it. In 1988, when Ted Turner was launching, we talked about this in the Thomas More episode. Ted Turner was launching the network, and he and Chuck were friends, and he needed,
which is an astounding thing.
Well, yeah, because their politics are galaxies apart. But that was Charlton Heston. He was somebody that didn't let such things like that get in the way of things. Also
shows the influence and integrity the man had.
Yes.
If he could be friends with somebody like Ted Turner, whose political views were so opposite. It also, his influence is shown that he was president of the Screen Actors Guild for some 6 years. Mm-hmm. So he had to have had the trust and some influence with his fellow actors.
And this is in a time where political tensions were running high. This is in the late 60s, early 70s. This is in the middle of Vietnam. Right. And Ed Asner and he were at loggerheads all the time because politically they were very, very different. And yet he enjoyed the support to be president for 6 years.
Yep. So we know him through a lot of the iconic roles. His first movie, it's not one he is well known for. Not his first movie, but his first big break, which is Greatest Show on Earth. Mm-hmm. Fantastic movie. Jimmy Stewart's in that movie, plays the clown Buttons.
Yeah.
Loved him in that. But he plays basically the manager of the circus. And that's a great role. He's young, he's energetic. He goes on to do Ten Commandments. He does Touch of Evil with Orson Welles. We talked about that in the Film Noir episode. And he goes on and does all these different movies. 55 Days at Peking. He does war movies. He does westerns. There's nothing this guy will not do if he thinks it's a good script.
Even a few comedies. He did The Private War of Major Benson.
Which is a phenomenal
fun movie.
Yeah.
He did that as a leading man, mind you, the year before the Ten Commandments.
Right.
He was not a big bankable star at that time.
Right.
But he was earning his way. But wow, I mean, if you see that movie today, it's still funny even today.
Ten Commandments followed quickly by Ben-Hur, which is the one he won the Oscar for.
Absolutely.
He won the Best Picture, and then he won the Best Actor. Don't think he ever won another Oscar, but that's all right.
No, he really prized his work in Ben-Hur. He wrote a lot about his life and his career too. I mean, he has 2 books that actually we've Martin, you've got copies of them sitting right here on the floor with us. His biography, In the Arena, that he put out in hardback, which we picked up. Robert and I actually met him.
Got to shake hands with the man.
Yeah,
This
is a story. During Heston's book tour for In the Arena, his autobiography, he actually came here, which doesn't happen a lot with book tours, to come to Louisville.
To a local independent bookstore at the time.
Local bookstore. He was signing the books. These 2 guys, I'm very jealous. They got to actually meet him and have their books signed. I had to be out of town for work, so my wife got to meet Moses.
Yeah.
Yes.
And got you the book. That's right. Yes.
So I do have a signed one, but I didn't get to actually watch the man sign it.
It was very brief. You were rushed in, rushed out.
I would imagine.
But you got to shake his hand, and he smiled.
Yes, he's a very gracious man.
He was a very gracious man. He was definitely a gentleman on that.
Yes. I still have a copy of the book, which Martin replaced for me. I lost mine in a flood, the one that I got signed, which still just hurts my heart sometimes I think about that.
Absolutely.
But it's very kind and gracious to replace it for me.
You have to scour eBay and see if you can find
the signed copy, yeah.
But you're talking about these parts, and he was the guy that made epic movies.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
El Cid.
Yeah, we only mentioned a few. He did El Cid in 62, I think.
Something like that.
I think that. And he also...
61.
Yeah, 61. And in 65, he did The Greatest Story Ever Told as John the Baptist, which was, the story of Christ with Max von Sydow, and any Hollywood star that you could figure out was in that movie.
Yeah,
or
people who went on to become big stars.
That's right.
Yeah.
John Wayne, was in that movie.
Yes.
And it was one of those great moments. And in many respects, even though he didn't get top billing, he's the one that makes the movie. Max von Sydow was still early in his career. Heston is at his height. And it's him and Jose Ferrer together as Herod and John the Baptist. Ooh, daddy. It's amazing.
But so he's the 50s and early 60s. He's the king of the epic film.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But as the epics fade,
Yeah.
he becomes the king of a whole new genre that's still a part of our lives today, and that's science fiction.
That's right.
So we were joking about Planet of the Apes and take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape. But really, that film is a cornerstone of science fiction films.
Correct.
And up to that point, no one in Hollywood takes science fiction films seriously.
Yeah, you get Forbidden Planet.
Yeah,
which is almost a joke.
Well, it's the monster movies and then the old serials, the Buck Rogers in the 30s.
Right.
To make a serious statement with a science fiction film the way Planet of the Apes does, that's new and unique, and
it was
Chuck's the cornerstone
That's
of
right.
it.
It was a phenomenon.
Yeah.
I mean, it spawned, 4 more sequels.
And then he goes
Plus
on
plus a
multiple
TV
TV shows and a cartoon.
You got it.
He goes on then to do 2 more science fiction films, The Omega Man and Soylent Green.
Of course, the Omega Man, the story was redone by Will Smith as
I Am Legend.
I Am Legend, which is actually the name of the book that the movie is based on.
Right.
Yes.
So if you know I Am Legend, it's essentially the same story.
So, to be the king of the epic film and then move into being the king of the early science fiction films, I mean, wow.
In just a few years.
That's a career right there.
Right.
And that doesn't even take into account, again, the Westerns like Will Penny. That's so good.
This is the range the man had. He did adventure stories.
Yep.
He did Westerns. He even did a few comedies. Not many, but he did some. He did war movies. He did the historicals.
Yep.
And he did period pieces.
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare.
Oh, that's right.
One of his favorite roles, he played Andrew Jackson twice, 2 different films. Loved that.
He was great as Andy Jackson.
Yeah, The Buccaneer was one of them.
Yes. Oh, that is one of my all-time favorites.
With Yul Brynner, again, which they were together in the 10 Commandments, and they came back again together and did that movie together.
Yes, the story that's the Battle of New Orleans at the end of the War of 1812 with pirate Jean Lafitte. That is just a great story in American history to begin with.
Yeah.
And him as Andy Jackson was great.
Yeah.
Loved it.
And I talk about 10 Commandments. I tweet every year, am I to be bathed or drowned? So just the
is that for your
lines.
annual bath?
I mean, that's the annual. To think that film is on every year, the same time of year.
It's become an Easter tradition.
Yeah, Chuck's Forever.
That's right.
So I think it's interesting. You guys brought up these 2 things. This 2 things that we admire at the same time. His devotion to his craft.
Yes.
That he was this actor who had all this range and really gave himself to the profession, and at the same time being this man of integrity. He took stands that weren't always popular.
Right.
He
Yes.
marched with Dr. King and tried to get other people in Hollywood to do it, and they wouldn't.
That's right.
Right. He was a civil rights activist before it was popular.
Yeah,
Very much so. It was considered to be, subversive.
it's a career killer.
That's right.
Yes.
It's a career killer, and then later, he's president of the NRA, and that's a career killer in Hollywood too. He saw no flip-flop in that, though.
No,
To him, that was the same thing. That was the promise of the Constitution for Dr. King,
Right.
and the promise of the Constitution in the Second Amendment. To him, that was the same. He's standing for the same principle at both ends. That in our world today, we say, "Well, that's crazy," but to him, it was not. This
Right.
was
Well, same
that-
thing with
that
being
intellect-
president of a union in the Screen Actors
Yes.
Guild. He was sticking up for the rights of those he worked with to make sure they were protected.
Mm-hmm.
That was quintessential him.
He was principled. And
Yes.
he did not. It did not matter what the weather was around him when it happened.
What is right is right.
Well, that's exactly what he would say.
He's
Yes.
married to the same woman his entire life.
She just passed away a year or so ago.
Really? I did not
Yes.
catch
I did
that.
not know
It's
that
very
maybe
recent.
they
Yeah,
did.
it's within the last year that she finally.
That's
did
one of the
pass
great
away.
Hollywood love stories.
Very much so. Yes.
You know, she was in acting early on,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, obviously when his career took off and they started having kids, she was not. I don't know if she ever did anything after the kids came along, but
She stuck with photography.
photography. Okay,
She really enjoyed photography.
Okay.
She would travel.
that's right.
With him,
Pictures in the book in the arena are hers.
That's
or,
right.
or to a great deal.
And
There
I remember
are
they had some that when we saw him, they had some that were available for purchase
Yes,
there when he kind of traveled with him, and they were Lydia's pictures. And I almost bought. I wished I'd have bought it. They had a picture of him on stage, a promotional photo as Thomas More.
oh, I'm surprised you didn't buy it.
Well, I didn't have the money at the time.
Yeah.
If I had the cash on me, I would have. I still regret that one because it was a really cool one.
Yeah, that's talking about the once in a lifetime thing. I mean, something
Yeah.
like that's just someone like Heston coming through this town. Unfortunately, is not likely to happen again.
Well, no, we waited in line for a significant period of time.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad, but it was significant, and it was.
Well, that line was moving.
It did.
They were
because-
getting
and that was-
maximum people through.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it was a great coup for them.
Oh,
to be
yes.
able to do that for a local bookstore to.
Yeah. Was it the Holly Cook?
It's Holly Cook Books. That's
the
right.
one on Shelbyville? or-
Shelbyville Road.
Yes,
That's
okay.
correct.
Yeah.
That's the one we went to.
And it's kind of a shame. Today he'd be so in demand at the Comic-Con type stuff.
Oh yeah.
And those do come through here.
Yes,
Mhm.
not as big as San Diego, of course, but we get 2 or 3 conventions a year now.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
comic
yeah.
book conventions do come through here, and
And of course, as we know, nerd culture rules.
Rules.
That's
Yeah.
right. Well, Planet of the Apes, we owe him for that because, in many respects, could any of the other could Star Trek or Star Wars ever been made on the big screen without Planet of the Apes proving that you can invest in this
you
and
can
make
do
it?
it. I think for sure, Star Trek as a film property
Yeah.
would not have happened without Planet of the Apes.
Right now,
Really, you think so?
well, there's a little bit. Well, Star Wars did take care of it ahead of time and do that.
Yeah, I
so
think once Star Wars hits, the gates are wide open.
right, but. Would Star Wars have been able to be made without Planet of the Apes before that? And I'm not saying that they're necessarily causal.
It's not directly linked, no.
It's
So,
time to
how
pump,
much
perhaps.
time is there between 2001 and Planet of the Apes? Because they're both 1968, aren't they? Or 2001, 69.
2001 was 69.
Okay.
Yeah, which was I think they both paved the way.
Yeah, it's because
2001's a very different movie, though.
well, it's a different movie, but it is more of a space movie kind
It
of
is.
science fiction.
It
so,
is.
from you can probably draw a straighter line thematically wise from 2001 to THX 1138 for George Lucas to Star Wars, as opposed to directly from Planet of the Apes. Now, industry wise, yeah, Planet of the Apes probably did say, hey, well, maybe we can do something besides westerns and historicals and cop movies.
right. And then,
And I think there's the tie between Planet of the Apes and Star Wars is we can do the makeup and do the non-human characters and have that be part of the story.
that's Planet
and-
of the Apes
and make
definitely
that
is
work.
That's the one that
And
made
it doesn't
that
have to
happen.
look cheesy.
That's right.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to look like a guy in a rubber suit.
Yeah, and Chewbacca and the bar scene and all the creatures, giving Lucas free reign of his imagination with the creatures and everything.
Yeah, Planet of the
I
Apes
think
is
that's
one that
Planet of the
yeah,
Apes.
very much so.
Proves that you can do that and take off with it.
And not just the original, because if it were just the one, maybe not. But considering they did 5 movies,
Yeah, and those other 4 were cheap because you didn't have the star power in the others that you do with
Right. I
Charlton
mean, Roddy
Heston.
McDowell is big, but he's not as big.
Right, but they already proved that this not only works, but people will pay. They'll show up in flocks to see this. I mean,
Yes.
it was one of the early movie
yeah.
franchises, other than
And
Bond.
for years,
It was one of the earliest.
Yeah, it was certainly the first science fiction franchise.
That's right. Yeah.
And for years afterwards, you could count on it regularly. ABC would show one of those movies. They were constantly being re-shown on whatever Saturday night movies
CBS.
or something.
It was CBS.
CBS?
Yes, because I remember I've actually got. You can find it on YouTube. The CBS evening Friday night movie, the trailer with that particular music. Mm-hmm. The one that somebody's uploaded to YouTube is the one with Planet of the Apes and Charlton Heston.
Okay.
I've actually got an MP3 audio of it.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. Absolutely. it's fantastically fun.
Why? What are you opening there, Martin?
The cork came out of the bourbon bottle because I'm a little dry here.
I still got a little bit of Four
So
Roses
I'm splashing some Four Roses. You had larceny.
I still have larceny. I'm not going to mix them.
So let me get you.
Yeah,
Let me get you some larceny.
Yes.
So, listeners, forgive me for moving a touch away from the microphone, but I was dry.
You got to do the bourbon. You got to do the bourbon.
You got to do the bourbon.
Absolutely.
So there's the cork back in
Chuck
larceny.
deserves good bourbon, doesn't he?
That's right.
As a subject matter, yeah, he's like I say, he was one of the when we first came up with the idea of doing an Our Heroes thing on our podcast. His was one of the first names that came up when we were talking about this. We knew we had to do him early because we've been fans of his. We talk about many of his movies. Some of the obscure movies, it's Chuck for us. That's good enough. That's all we needed to hear. And that's one of the things that I think that we also admire about him because of his craft. He turned in a great movie.
This is one of the
No
points
matter
I
what he
made
did. Even the stinky scripts.
Yes.
It's still worth watching.
He was a
because he's there.
professional all the way around.
A quintessential professional.
It's
And
one
that's
of the points I
admirable.
made in the pre-show discussion. Was one of the things I put him up there with Stephen King and Michelangelo as far as craftsmen. Mm-hmm. They take their craft or took their craft incredibly seriously. When you look at whether you like his books or not, how well Stephen King constructs his stories.
Oh yeah, there's no question he's a master author.
And when you look at the craftsmanship that Michelangelo put into his sculptures, or even into the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling and the Last Judgment on the far wall, it's just phenomenal. Especially his Pietà, which sits in the Vatican, which I got to see in person 2 years ago, which still is the high point. Close second was celebrating Mass at the Vatican, at St. Peter's. But seeing that statue in person, seeing it was the high point for me. And Chuck is right up there. He is so serious. When you read In the Arena, where he talks about his preparation, he didn't just get a script and ask, how much money are they paying me? Okay, I'll do it. He took it so seriously that he took months to prepare. Mm-hmm. He would hire voice coaches so he could have the right accent. Although, to be honest, I don't know that I can tell the difference. But maybe my ear is not as good as
he
it
had a
should be.
distinctive voice, for sure.
He did. And, it's not like I've ever watched one that are supposed to be far apart from another and, listen to them back to back.
Touch of Evil is a good one for a slightly different voice. It's early for him. And he played a very different character there.
He's supposed to be playing somebody's Hispanic.
Hispanic, that's correct. And it was also Orson Welles, which has got a very different take on things. Yeah. He does a very good job. He was one of his favorite movies, he says in the book. Because it was so different. Even though it's, he hadn't even done 10 Commandments yet.
Right. But the preparation that he went through was just great. If he needed to know how to do something, he would take the time to learn how to do it before the movie. Mm-hmm. Now, he already knew how to ride.
Yeah, he was a great horseman, too.
But, if he hadn't been on a horse in a year and he was doing a movie where he had to be on a horse, he probably took some time to go back and make himself ready. He didn't half-ass anything. And that is what makes him such a joy to watch. It's not difficult to suspend my disbelief watching him play somebody.
Yeah. It's not very well known, but he did an NFL movie.
Yes. Yes.
Number One. I think is what it's called.
That's right. Yeah.
And he tried to play football with real football players from the 1960s and 70s. He got
knocked on his ass.
He got clobbered a little bit, but he tried to make that believable. he's one of the few American actors that ever played someone other than an American, too. And it doesn't happen very often. But he played a Brit in Khartoum, played General Chinese Gordon. I love Khartoum. Great movie. He's with Laurence Olivier.
Oh,
he loved to work with other
great actors.
top-level professionals.
And he worked with all the greats from his era.
Yeah, he worked with
men and
Olivier.
women.
He worked with
Yul Brynner.
David Niven.
David Niven, yes.
Worked with
Rex Harrison.
a ton of great Brits.
Agony and the Ecstasy for me.
Yeah.
And to me, that's great because he is Michelangelo in that. So for me, it's
Sure.
a twofer.
Yeah. But he worked with John Gielgud, right?
Yes, he did.
Yes.
Yes,
yes.
he
Yeah,
did.
that was
Sophia Loren.
in Julius Caesar.
Whom he didn't like,
Which he
actually.
did not like. Which is, it's like, what's not to like? But,
Yeah, he found, I forget what he says about, he speaks about it in the book that he says, because he was originally offered, Samuel Bronston is the one that produced El Cid, and his next movie was Fall of the Roman Empire, and he had Chuck on tap to play that. But he says, I'm not working again with Sophia Loren. I can't stand her. We just did not get along.
which just is a great
and
example
it was
of
Stephen
what
Boyd, who was with him in Ben-Hur, that took the role eventually.
So, and this is a great example of what we've always said about women that guys start drooling over. And no matter how hot you think she is, somewhere somebody is tired of putting up with her shit.
Oh, good Lord.
But it's pretty unusual for Chuck not to get along with another actor.
Well,
That's true.
and that's perhaps that's the exception that proves the rule. His extreme professionalism, when he says something like that, that's kind of like, really? You can't get along with her?
Yeah.
Because you can get along with anybody. I mean, even Sam Peckinpah, who was drunk most of the day when they filmed Major Dundee, he actually came at him with a sword. Believe it or not,
horseback.
On
Yeah.
horseback,
Charged him.
Yeah.
And Peckinpah said, "No, take the crane
Up. He's on a crane, and he asked him to go down the hill in a canter or something, and he went too fast, and he called him. I don't remember the name, but it was pretty rude. And Heston just had it with him. He turns around because he's got a sword in his hand. He's on a horse, and he charges him with it. And Peckinpah has a fit, raises the crane, and lets him go by. And Chuck says he never had a problem with him after that.
Imagine that.
Imagine that.
And they made a lot of movies together, didn't they?
No, that's the only one that they did together.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
pretty
the
Wasn't
sure.
there Sam that he did a lot of movies with? Who am I thinking of?
I don't
No?
know. That was the only one that he worked with Sam Peckinpah as director.
Right. Franklin Schaffner, he did...
Did 3 or 4.
He
with
did 3 or
Schaffner.
4 with Schaffner. He did The Warlord, and I think 65, and that's kind of what led to Planet of the Apes, is because Maurice Evans was in The Warlord. They worked
Another
together.
great actor, yes.
That's right. He worked with, and that's the reason that he got him to play Dr. Zaius, is because originally Edward G. Robinson was supposed to do it, but his health was
It was
bad.
so bad he couldn't
Right.
wear the makeup.
He
But
couldn't wear
worked-
the makeup.
He worked with Edward G. Robinson a couple of different times.
Well, yeah, he was in Soylent Green, of course, and of course the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
He was with him. But the original, we talked about the screen test for Planet of the Apes. It was Edward G.
With
Robinson,
Robinson,
who
yeah.
did the screen test with the makeup. And it's on the DVD. You can watch it. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's another thing. Now, he didn't obviously have to do anything with the makeup, but he had to run around mostly naked throughout that movie.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a great actor to
That's
be
a
able
lot
to do.
of courage.
Well,
especially for a guy.
Well,
yeah.
and actually, you remember the scene.
I mean,
that-
girl too, but I mean, it's. But anyways,
Yeah, but
I think
that's Linda Harrison. That's another subject.
yes,
But that's another.
yes.
However, do you remember the scene that we started this episode off with? That famous line. He says this in the book. He had 102-degree fever when he's filming that. He was sick,
Wow.
and
Yes.
he's running around with just this stinking cloth on, and he says little footies on his feet that you can't really see. All with this 100-degree fever. That's professionalism.
Yeah.
You have to film this scene.
How many big stars today
would have done that?
Would have done that.
That's exactly right. And he's very clear in the book. That's just what you did.
Right.
You've got a shooting schedule to get here.
He loved working with other professionals. He found David Niven very professional.
Yes, he
really
did.
enjoyed
That's
working
right.
With him.
So
And one actress that he worked with, I think he had more pity for her or more feeling for her, Ava Gardner,
Yes.
who was
She
not
was
super professional. She had
damaged is what he called her.
Yeah, she, I believe, had alcohol issues as well.
Right.
And he worked with her twice, I guess it was.
I think so.
in what?
Earthquake.
That's Earthquake, yes.
And 55 Days at Peking.
That's the other one. Yes, that's
and
right.
he really felt for her. She really did have difficulties in working and continuing to work. And
so, one of the things that we haven't talked about, but I think this is important to understand Chuck, and that's when you think about the year he was born in 1923. So he's coming of age in the Depression.
mm-hmm.
And when we think about the Depression, it's not something that almost anybody living today, certainly anybody that knows how to work a podcast, is going to be able to relate to. You know, that is such a cataclysmic event.
It's very unique in our
that,
history.
You know, the only thing that has the same kind of imprint on our consciousness are things like the Civil War and World War II, and the Revolution. I mean, those things, and you think about the World War II, is on the heels of the Depression. It's what really gets us out of the Depression.
They're often smashed together because it's the same generation that's
right.
experiencing it.
Yes, the people who grew up in the Depression are the ones who are fighting World War II.
Right, so...
And the greatest generation, as it's
right.
Yes.
For them, it's one narrative.
It is. Yeah, you can't really separate the two. I think having the same president through all of that time is part of that.
Sure.
But I think that background really is what makes him the man that he is, about his professionalism, his desire to stick to his principles. That's that generation. And
well, self-reliance.
And self-reliance.
Is a huge part of who he was and who that generation became.
Yes.
You did, we're talking about the professional, you did things because you were supposed to. You say you're a professional actor. This is what professional actors do. Right. You have to show up and be there.
Because if you don't, there's plenty of guys that will take your job.
Yep.
Well, even once he had become what he calls in the book the 1,000-pound gorilla, where he could command any performance he wanted to. By the time the 60s are going on, he's a big enough bankable star. He can choose what he wants.
Right.
He still picked the right roles and reinvents himself over and over again.
Yeah. But part of that goes back to his background. So it's not just the growing up in the Depression and coming of age and then fighting in World War II. It's also, for me, I think this is very much part of it, because it feeds into the studio system.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going to instill in him early on that professionalism, that I show up when I'm told, when I'm supposed to, and I do my job, because that studio system is very much a growth out of that Depression era type of economics. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of people who are willing to take your slot.
If you don't produce, somebody else will.
And that's why he makes so many movies early on, is it just becomes, that's what you do. Mm-hmm. And once he becomes a big enough star and he's no longer in the studio system, he just keeps doing it.
And like you mentioned, it's not just showing up; it's showing up ready,
prepared.
That's
right. Hitting the mark.
That's what he was famous for. He was ready. He researched. He knew Andrew Jackson's life inside and out.
Right.
In which he felt he needed to do that to convincingly portray him on film.
Right. So, to me, it's... I'm sure there were other actors that did that, and I'm just not familiar with their stories. Because there must have been. He couldn't be the only guy who did this.
Well, Olivier was a consummate professional as well.
Yes,
and he was known.
I mean, as far as that kind of preparation and everything to go with it.
Yeah.
I think anybody that came out of that studio era, Depression and World War II and all of that, probably had a lot of that same kind of work ethic, if they didn't succumb to the dangers of Hollywood. Where you take yourself too seriously, where you get involved with alcohol and drugs, because even back then there were still drugs.
Oh yeah.
Well, there's a famous story told about Olivier when making the movie Marathon Man, which you can find this anywhere. It's with Dustin Hoffman, and Hoffman was a member of the method acting school, and the character he was playing was supposed to have been up for like 3 days, and Hoffman does this. And stays up for like 3 days when he's ready to film these scenes. And Olivier famously said to him, "My dear boy, have you ever considered just acting?" And which, of course, is one of those famous stories.
Yeah,
but that's Olivier. That's also Chuck. That's what you did. You just acted.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this?
How else can you play it, Larry?
Yeah.
Acting.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. And that's the sort of thing. I mean, these are great stories. They're great anecdotes. And the best part about them, and you know, the thing with Sophia Loren shows that he was human.
Yes.
But the best part about them is it shows how human he was, both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to think of big stars today in those same kind of anecdotes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, about showing. I mean, again, I'm not saying that stars today are not prepared, that they don't do their research.
Sure.
But it just seems like so many more are selfish bastards, for lack of a better term. I mean, you know,
Well, Chuck would work with just about anybody.
Yeah, he would.
It's in many.
Part of that's showing up and doing your job.
Well, that's right. And those that worked, many of his lesser-known co-stars would speak of him in years later and say, you know, this guy here, he always had a smile. He always had something to say. He never looked down on any of his co-stars or the crew or anybody that worked with him. He was just a professional. And that's admirable.
It is.
He treated people with dignity, no matter what their station was.
So last episode we did the Strength and Honor. Charlton Heston, I think, would understand exactly what we mean about
Yes.
Strength and Honor.
Yes, he would. Yes, indeed,
I
he
think
would.
he is a great example of that.
That integrity of
Yeah.
things, of living by a principle because that's what you do. That
Right.
it means something.
You know, he wasn't an actor or even an activist just because it was a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was part and parcel of who he was.
That's right.
But how he went about it is so admirable.
Because he went against convention.
He took everything so seriously. He never half-assed anything,
Right.
and he was the consummate professional, both on screen and with his fellow performers and the crew. Like you were just saying, he always had a smile for them. Part of that is that honor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is an honorable way to go about your business.
It's an honorable way to conduct yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, he went to Vietnam without a film crew.
Oh.
Helicoptered in, you know, to forward positions
To an FOB, forward operating base.
and just interacted with soldiers. Said, I'll go home and contact your family, your girl, whatever. Let them know I talked to you. Didn't take a film crew.
That is unheard of today.
Yeah.
You know, just a few years after that, probably, because I'm sure that was, what, late 60s?
68 and 69, I think.
So just 3 years later, you've got Jane Fonda goes to Vietnam. Oh, there's a film crew.
With a very different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying she's not honorable, but I think that was a very dishonorable thing
Very
she did.
dishonorable thing.
And that is just a great... The one story is, you think, oh, that's nice. But I think how nice is when you contrast it with something like the Jane Fonda story. When you look at the guys who did stuff like that, you know, granted, Bob Hope was doing USO tours. They didn't always film. I mean, there was probably a lot of filming going on, but it wasn't filming so that they could use it for publicity.
Right. Gary Sinise is famous for doing it currently. He's been very
Yes.
involved in seeing troops all over the world as an entertainer. And he doesn't, you know, he's known for it, but it's not... He
Built
doesn't,
charity around
that's
it.
exactly right.
I mean,
he does it for the right reasons. He's,
Yeah.
he's a
It's
very
the
remarkable
Lieutenant
guy.
Dan, whatever he called it, but it's after his character in
Oh,
Forrest
yeah,
Gump.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's kind of what started it, I think.
Sinise, yeah, I'm glad you brought him up. He's very much the inheritor of Heston's mantle. He probably wouldn't see it that way. He think, you know, he's certainly his own person and doing things for his own reasons. But I see him as the inheritor of Heston's mantle.
I can see that. I mean, he may not be the actor. He may not have the chops in that respect, but he is a professional. He's a very honorable man.
And
He stands up for what he believes
Yeah.
in, no matter what the cost.
and he's a fine actor as well, very professional.
He is.
He played Truman in the adaptation of David McCulloch's book quite a few years ago. And you know, this shows this guy's got a range. He did a fantastic
I don't
job.
remember him in that.
It was a I believe an HBO
maybe
production.
I
was,
didn't see it.
It was not in the theaters. It was, I want to say, one
Yeah.
of the cables. And it's astounding. Now, I don't know if you've read the book, I know you guys have read McCulloch quite a few times.
Yes, I have not read Truman.
I've not read his Truman.
It's worth it. It really is. Anything McCulloch does is fine work, of course.
His 1776 is still one of my all-time
favorites. His Truman and his Lincoln are my two favorites. And I've not read all. Actually, I have not read the John Adams. I know you guys both have.
I've skimmed it. I have not read it.
Yeah. It's one of these things I will eventually.
I understand that the HBO miniseries was very true to the book. And that was phenomenal
That was
series.
Paul Giamatti, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. I have not seen it.
And Laura...
Flynn Boyle?
No.
I do not recall.
I can picture her face, but I cannot think of her name. It's Laura something or other. Anyways, she was Adams' wife. We're getting a little bit far afield here. Although, you know what? Chuck Heston, he would have made a great Revolutionary War Actually, he did play Jefferson.
He did?
He did play Jefferson, but I think he would have made a good Washington as well.
We had the height, too. That helps.
Yes, he was a tall man, yes.
Mm-hmm. Think of him as Hamilton.
Yes.
Not, of course, musical Lin-Manuel Miranda or anything, but if a real film adaptation of Hamilton's life, Chuck would have been the guy to play him.
And he would have gladly taken on that role, even though he would have died at the end of the movie, because he was not against that. You know, a lot of big name actors. No, I'm not going to be in this movie if I die in it. I mean, think about it, that's true.
That was the thing that all actors wanted, was a great death scene.
Well, that's how
that depends.
That's how Nicholas Meyer got Leonard Nimoy to do Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, saying, "How would you like?" Because he was kind of soured on the role. He says, "How'd you like a good death scene?" And the rest is science fiction movie history, of course.
Yeah. So I want to tie this though. Like I like to tie every time we do a hero.
Yes.
I want to tie them together. I want to paint that paint is the wrong word. String that narrative together and tie from Moore to Milius to Grant to Heston.
I'm going to leave out Van Gogh.
And Van Gogh. You know,
this is episode 39, for goodness sakes. We've done quite a few.
We've done
of these.
some heroes.
Yeah.
You know, he's his own person. He, again, nearly wrecked his career marching with Dr. King. But he felt it was the right thing to do. He nearly wrecked his career working with the NRA. Felt it was the right thing to do.
Now, when did he start working with them?
He was mostly retired, but this is in the 90s.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, because, I mean, certainly for his reputation, that would have been a very bad thing. I'm just wondering how much of a career-threatening thing that
No,
was.
not much at that time, because he'd kind of done whatever he wanted.
But he was well known as a conservative by then.
That's correct, yeah.
Well, I guess that's, moving into the conservative camp. But again, I want to emphasize,
it was still a little bit of a further step.
Yeah,
it's more than just politics; it's activists.
It's a consistent intellectual exercise, and being that individualist, being that person who stood on his principles, very admirable.
Oh, absolutely.
So so there, like Van Gogh, there's two things here to admire. Mm-hmm. That craftsmanship, but also that personal life. And like you said, I think strength and honor would have been something he would have said.
He would, if Gladiator were made in 1965, he would have been Maximus.
Yes.
I think that's not a stretch at all. I think that's
if
very
if it had been made in 91, he'd have been Marcus Aurelius.
Yes.
Well, yeah, there's some truth to that too.
And he would have adopted that phrase, I think. So Chuck's very much in the strength and honor pantheon.
Absolutely. So. Absolutely. Well, Francis, I think we have just about wrapped up this. Martin, you think so too?
We're at 44 minutes, so...
All right, Francis, what's up next week?
Oh, my goodness. This is one I've been waiting for, guys.
Oh, I know what one is up next week.
Yes, you do.
Gee, I think I should captain this one.
No. Next week, we're going back to pop culture, and it's going to be the wisdom of Captain Jean-Luc Picard.
How topical.
How topical, yes, because Star Trek Picard just premiered recently.
That's
I have
right.
watched the first episode.
As have I.
It was a pain in the butt to stream, even though I watched it late at night. Granted, it was the first night, but still.
Okay.
Because
Huge
it's on the-
audience.
yeah,
Huge audience, that's right.
yeah.
We watched it the next day, didn't have a problem with it, and oh my gosh, it was just it's every bit as good as I was expecting
Did
it
you
to be.
giggle?
Did I giggle? The fan service to it? Yes, there's plenty of that. That's correct. We can talk about that though next
Mrs.
episode.
Martin said it was good. I have not had an opportunity to view it.
It was good. It's amazing to realize the man is 92. But this is going far afield. This is for next week. So next
Right,
week,
because there's a
episode 40.
a lot to explore about the man, the character, but most importantly, the great words that have been delivered by Patrick Stewart in that character, but written by so many other folks in the many years that he's played him. So catch us next time.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Be sure to spread the word on your social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We are on Instagram and on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
Let your friends know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just search Snakes and Otters Podcast to find us, and please remember to leave us your comments and reviews. It helps people find us.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Catch us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.